All right, thanks for pressing click on there and joining us for this conversation with Teddy Schleifer, a founding partner of Puck, a news platform that's going to be kicking in a couple of weeks here, probably just after Labor Day. Before his current project with that, Teddy was at Vox, and before that he was at CNN. So you grew up in Delaware, Teddy,
Yep.
and went to DC to work for CNN, and then what happened?
So I was at CNN covering money and politics, which is, I sort of think of that as like an adjacent beat to philanthropy. I mean, it's got a lot of the same characters, a lot of the same tensions between kind of donors and campaigns or donors and nonprofits. And I was covering kind of billionaires in politics. And I would get a little bit of flavor or color about what their non-political lives were like. I would deal with some staff who kind of managed political giving and charitable giving, or, people at the companies who would be sort of moonlighting as political aides in their founders' personal capacities. But I realized there was a whole world here of kind of big money that wasn't really covered or scrutinized that well. I mean, there are reporters in DC who cover money and politics. It's still, I would say, certainly not a saturated beat, given how saturated DC coverage has become. And I do a lot of money and politics coverage still. But I moved out here to San Francisco, the home of the billionaire class, or today's billionaire class. It's even more of a billionaire class than it was when I came out here just 4 years ago. People sort of lose track of the numbers, but even the last 4 years, these people have gotten massively wealthier. And I moved out here to join Recode, which is a part of Vox Media and covers the tech industry. And I sort of got to know all the players out here and started looking into kind of this sort of the story of these people's soft power. There's a lot of folks here in San Francisco and in tech media who write about what happens at the companies, right? Who write about what happens at Facebook, or write about the venture capital world. I've done some of the venture capital world reporting, but I was kind of interested in what happens after you make the money, right? Like, yes, okay, you get really rich. There's a lot of people who cover that. I sort of don't play on that terrain, but when you make the money, how does your life change? What are your responsibilities to the world? How do you channel that money into making the world, in your view, a better place? What are the trade-offs if you try to do that? Who manages your money? How do you think about taxes? I tried to come up with like a broad 360 view of kind of what it's like to be a billionaire in 2021. And that's what I did at Recode before joining Puck.
And Puck now will continue to fill that niche or expand beyond it in some ways, or what will Puck cover?
So what Puck is, it's a new subscription media company that's starting with about a dozen people on the editorial side, who are all interested in kind of these questions of money and power and ego and influence in different power centers of American society. So I'm here in Silicon Valley. We have folks in Washington, folks in Wall Street, folks in Hollywood, all sort of having, I'd say, the same intellectual framework, but different topic areas.
And while it will not cover philanthropy per se, obviously philanthropy is a big part of what you're describing. I guess my question to you is, how big? I mean, if there's a pie chart, how much of Puck's content will be covering philanthropy the way someone like me would think of it or talk about it?
Sure. So I think it's going to stay a big part of what I cover. I mean, I over the summer have been writing a newsletter called The Stratosphere, which is, folks can sign up for if they're interested. There'll be a link, I think, in the write-up, or it's thestratosphere.news. And that's a lot of that's about philanthropy. It's not like, I don't think about philanthropy coverage in terms of just philanthropy coverage about the industry. I think, some of that can feel kind of ponderous or almost too inside baseball. But I think there's a great story about the ways in which philanthropy is affecting the world and how it affects people outside of the industry. And I think that's fascinating. And I think no one, I think there's a lot of a greenfield for people to cover this stuff. You know, if you run a charitable foundation, you know, when you spend, if you're Mackenzie Scott, right, and you spend $8 billion in 18 months or whatever it is, how does that affect the world? You know, do nonprofits do good with that money? Does it get squandered? What does it say about kind of billionaires that are able to do this so quickly? Does she sort of prove the lie that it's impossible to spend this money at that rate? That's the sort of question I'm fascinated by. I'm less interested in, like, you know, people changing jobs in the philanthropy industry and stuff like that. But also philanthropy has a tremendous intersection with politics. You know, what one person calls philanthropy, someone else might just call politics. I think the lines between C3 giving and C4 giving are extremely blurred and are getting thinner by the day. And lots of people, progressives at least, see their philanthropic coverage as philanthropic gifts as political, even though they get a C3 tax benefit for it, which is a contradiction I can't quite square. But clearly, if you're interested in politics, if you're interested in philanthropy, if you're interested in the conversation about billionaires in America more broadly, you know, are billionaires a policy failure, as people on the left say? I think you'd have a lot to enjoy in what I'm writing.
And the Stratosphere will continue as a newsletter, email?
Yeah, we're figuring that out, but some part of it will definitely kind of stick around.
And Puck will be, as you described it, subscription based. Any philanthropic support for Puck in there, or
no? It's not as far as I know. I mean, it's a journey. It's, you know, we have kind of investor backers, and you know, a lot of it is owned by people like me and by journalists who are kind of at the fore of the company. So we're no conflicts of interest, which is one good thing here. But
yeah. Is our subscriptions going to be enough to sustain it? I guess that's what you're going to find out in the dice you're rolling, or
we feel good. I mean, there's a you know, I think there's a large community of people who like what we're doing, and you know, we feel good about it.
Yeah. Is it the case that, and if so, when did the center of gravity of major giving in America, when did that shift
out here
to Silicon Valley?
It's a good question. I mean, as I said a couple of minutes ago, I do think it's a hard question to answer, because like these things just, you know, it's like a slow boiling frog, right? These things happen very gradually. You don't really notice. I mean, look, there have been waves. Obviously, you know, things like Hewlett and Packard have been around for forever. And then there was sort of the wave of kind of the first .com boom, right? Where you had Pierre Omidyar and Jeff Skoll. And, you know, to some extent, that was kind of the early days of the Gates Foundation, though they're sort of outside Silicon Valley. And there was, you know, a wave around kind of social entrepreneurship, you know, using kind of startup language as part of an attempt to, you know, figure out charitable giving. And then there's sort of been the post kind of first wave tech boom, right? The second wave tech boom, where you see, you know, money that was made in companies like Facebook and Google and Amazon start getting, maybe Amazon took a while, the money took a while to get out the door. But, you know, you've seen things like the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which I think was started in 2015. You know, the Bezos Earth Fund was started, I guess, last year. Schmidt has been doing a ton of stuff for a long time, but his most recent iteration of kind of a pretty sprawling network is Schmidt Futures, which I think was started in 2016 or 2017, around then. And then there's just random people you've never even heard of, you know, who aren't household names, who have tens of billions of dollars, who are channeling their philanthropy into interesting ways. You know, Dustin Moskovitz, one of the founders of Facebook, who's not Mark Zuckerberg, started an open philanthropy project sometime in the last decade or so, though there was an earlier version of it. So I think the answer is it's been happening forever, but really over the last 10 years, you've seen the power shift from the Ford Foundation and, you know, the Rockefeller Foundation, which to places out here. And as a reporter, it's always been interesting because like so much coverage is about the East Coast foundations because they're more transparent and because they're legacy institutions in a way that have, like, you know, I think more people have heard of them, so like I understand it. But you know, Mackenzie is a great example of how She's obviously getting a lot of coverage, but she put out more money last year, I think, than the Ford Foundation and the Gates Foundation combined. And I'll see this sometimes in my own work when I'm just being nerdy and boring. When I'll be looking through some tax filings from some foundation, and I'll see something that has like $2 billion, like billions of dollars, with no website, like never been covered ever. And I'm just sitting there being like, what the hell is happening in this world? Where like these things have such enormous war chests of money, and there's zero coverage of it. So it's an opportunity to cover it well.
Yeah. Well, why don't we finish with part one there and pick up with part two on the other side?
Sure.